Welcome to Calling All Voices, brought to you by Dementia Action Alliance and the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease. My name is Deborah Tan, and I serve as a board member for Dementia Action Alliance. In the Calling All Voices podcast series, you will hear from people living with dementia and care partners from diverse communities. They will share their stories about resilience and persistence and how it can help people to continue to live meaningful lives, even with a diagnosis of dementia. And you will also hear these participants discuss why it is important that we call all voices to share their experiences.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast series, Calling All Voices. Calling All Voices focuses on hearing from the lived experiences of those often marginalized, underserved, and not always heard. My name is Jessica. I have the privilege of being the host of this series of Calling All Voices that is focused on hearing from individuals from the Asian community. I am so excited today because I'm joined by Jessica. And Jessica and I will be exploring some really important topics. One of them being, how has her Chinese background influenced the way she and her family understood and coped with dementia? How her role as a granddaughter may have influenced the way she experienced the dementia journey alongside her grandmother, and the need for more information and access to ethnic culturally appropriate services and supports. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. Jessica is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto in social work, and she identifies as a second-generation Chinese Canadian. She supported her grandmother, who was living with cognitive changes for almost a decade, while at the same time supporting her mother, who had cancer. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's get right into it. I'm going to ask you the first question. Can you tell me a little bit more about the role you played as a care partner to your grandmother, and who else was involved in supporting her?
Yeah, so I started caring for my grandmother around the time I was about 14 or 15 or so. So I was fairly young. I was still in high school. And that was when we first noticed that she was starting to become a little bit forgetful. So it started out that the responsibilities were more kind of me reminding her to take her meds, helping her with some meal prep, very, very basic things. She was still fairly independent. She was still able to kind of move around and do a lot of things for herself. So it was mostly just reminding her of things and making sure that she didn't forget to take her meds, forget to eat, that sort of thing. And then at that time, my parents, both my mom and dad, were still working. And they would leave pretty early in the morning and they would come home late in the evening. So it was a lot of time where it was just me and my grandmother. And so it wasn't as tough back then because my grandmother was still fairly independent. But as kind of over the years, her dementia did deteriorate. And I found that when I was starting university, undergrad, that was when her dementia was declining a bit and she was requiring a bit more help. So the year that before I started my first year of university, my final year of high school, my grandmother was hospitalized. And that was when we started receiving, I think about 1 or 2 hours a week of PSW support. So the hospital and the social workers, they had set that up for us. So we had a little bit of help where they would come over and help my grandmother with bathing, dressing, that sort of thing. But it was only about 1 or 2 hours a week. And so that was the only outside support that we had. And so outside of that, it was just me and my mom and my dad. And I want to say, I think it was about right after I finished my undergrad, that was when my grandmother was hospitalized. That was for like a very major one. She had a GI bleed. Her oxygen levels were very low. She had pneumonia. She had water in her lungs, and that was when it was really, really bad. And the doctor told her that she had just days. And at that time, my mom took a very extended leave from work, and my dad also made the decision to retire because it was a lot. And that was the year before I was going to start my master's. And so it was just us. And she made a full recovery. She was able to come home, and we were able to take her back home with us. But from that point on, that was when she required a lot more support. And so the hospital and the social workers, they were able to get us, I believe, about 21 hours a week of support from PSWs. And so we had that. But outside of that, it was still just the three of us at home with her. And so we would have to help her with the bathing and the toileting and dressing and meal prep and all of that.
It's a lot for you and your family.
Yeah.
When you started your care partner journey, you mentioned you were in high school. So do you think your experience as a young care partner may differ from others who might be, a spouse or an adult child? And what might those differences be?
So it's interesting because I don't think I ever really consider myself as a care partner or a caregiver. I never identified as that. I never even knew there was like a term for it. I was always just helping out with my grandmother, just because we have a very close relationship. And so we spent a lot of time when I was growing up, and she was the one that would take me to school, bring me back, make me lunch, make me an afternoon snack. So it was just me and her. And so we were very close. And I just saw it as being, what I was supposed to do. This is my grandmother. She needs help. So I'm going to step in and help her out. But there were times, especially in high school, I know that there were a lot of things that I would say that I have missed out on because of my role as a caregiver. And it's hard at that time because I didn't know anyone else around my age that was experiencing the same thing, who were caregivers, or maybe they just didn't talk about it because I also didn't talk about it. But I feel that I had missed out on a lot of opportunities to make friendships, and maybe go out. And I know, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to go out and just to go to the mall or go to the movies with friends, because I had to be at home with my grandmother. And I think at that time, at around that age, teenagers, I think after a few times of me kind of declining invites, I think they just kind of stopped coming. And so I feel like that was a part of my life that I had missed out on, to be able to kind of create those solid friendships at that time. And so as I got older, I didn't have those friendships and relationships to be able to lean back on. It was mostly just me because I was also an only child. So it was just me and it was my parents. And that's who I had. So I don't know about other young carers and their experiences, but for me, I think I had missed out on a lot, and I think I had missed out on the opportunity to kind of create and maintain some relationships and friendships at that time.
Thanks for sharing. It's definitely not easy being a care partner and then on top of that, a young care partner. I'm really curious to know, Jessica, how might have your Chinese background influenced the way you and your family understood and coped with the diagnosis of dementia?
So I don't believe that my grandmother ever received a formal dementia diagnosis. Um, but our understanding of it, we didn't really kind of even think about dementia. We just said she's forgetful, and it's age. Um, that's just kind of how we understood it. Um, but I think with our Chinese, I mean, we're not very, very, connected to culture, I would say, because my parents came when they were very young. Um, but we still had those kind of, we still had some Chinese cultural fundamentals that we held on to. The big one was that we're not going to send my grandmother to a long-term care home or a retirement home. We want her to keep her at home in the community where she's comfortable. So that was a big one. That was never an option to send her to a home. We were always going to keep her with us. But yeah, but about the dementia diagnosis, I don't think we ever received a formal diagnosis for it. So I don't think we ever really looked into it.
On that note, like tell me a little bit about the early experience of getting help and tapping into healthcare and the role you and your family played in that.
I think because there was never a formal diagnosis, and there was never really anything specific that she needed help with, it was hard to get help. So it wasn't something that we had looked into because we didn't know that there was help out there, number one. We didn't know that there was PSWs out there or we didn't know that it was even there. So it wasn't something that we looked into. It was only after her first hospitalization, this was back in, I want to say 2007 or 8, that was when we first got the 1 or 2 hours per week of the PSW support. And that was through the hospitals and the hospital social workers that they were able to set that up for us. But outside of that, we we didn't even know where to start looking to get any help.
I recall in talking to you, you said you or your mother had to act as a translator, and that's why maybe it posed a difficulty in getting a formal diagnosis or figuring out what's next in terms of supports. Can you expand upon that a little bit?
Yeah, so that was, I don't remember which year it was, but that was fairly early on. Because we had told her family doctor that she was having more of these forgetful moments. And I believe it was him who had referred us to a doctor who could do an assessment for dementia. But it was all done in English. And so there was no option to do it in Mandarin, which is my grandmother's mother tongue. And I mean, she did speak English, but it was very limited. And so when we went to do to do the assessment, not the diagnosis, to do the assessment, one of us had to go in with her. So my mother had gone in with my grandmother. And a lot of the questions that they asked, sometimes it doesn't translate perfectly into Mandarin. There's no kind of equivalent words or phrases as to what they're asking. And so I think there was a lot of things that were lost in translation, or maybe my grandmother had been taking some time to kind of think about what my mom was also asking. And I think the doctor, what my mom said after was that the doctor seemed to be getting a little bit frustrated and annoyed that it was taking that time to do the translation and then for her to think about the question. And he took that to mean that, she was just so far gone and she had no idea what was going on. And some of the questions that she got some things wrong because she didn't fully understand what the question was asking. But there were certain things that, she did perfectly on. She nailed all the math questions. Asking her like, what object is this? What is this thing? She did perfectly. But he still said that she was completely gone. It is the most severe dementia he has ever seen. So we didn't take that to be, a proper diagnosis. So we took that with a grain of salt, but we knew that there was something there, that she was starting to get forgetful, but we didn't think that it was as severe as it was made out to be.
That really speaks to the importance of having access to culturally appropriate information and assessments. You also spoke in one of our conversations about how valuable it was to tap into more culturally appropriate supports. I think of the paid caregiver you had you found and recruited, and just the importance of having someone who maybe your grandmother identified with. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so we had looked into possibly hiring some private carers. We didn't know who to look for yet. We just kind of went online just to see what was out there. But we did know that we wanted someone who spoke the same language. And I think that was mainly because of the PSWs that we had gotten from the agencies that had been sent over. My grandmother seemed to be more comfortable with people who either spoke Chinese and or looked like us. It seemed to make her a bit more comfortable. Not to say that she wasn't comfortable with some of the others, but she just seemed to be a bit more open and a bit more accepting of the help that was being offered by people who spoke the same language or who looked like us. And so we knew that if we were going to get a private care, that we wanted someone who was Chinese or looked like us, and who spoke the language. It was also easier for her to communicate what she needed and wanted. And so that's what we looked for. This was in 2021, I believe. This was during COVID, was when we first looked into hiring a personal care because a lot of the PSW services had stopped because of COVID. And so we were looking into someone who could help out and who could also kind of be a live-in caregiver for a few days a week. Because this was also around the time that my mom was diagnosed with cancer. So she was diagnosed in early 2021. And so that was around the time, because we knew, me and my dad, we would have to also be providing care for my mom on top of that, because we were down one caregiver for my grandmother. And the two of us had to split our time between my grandmother and my mom. So we looked into a private care at that time, and we hired someone. We had gone through a few, but they were all Chinese, and they all were able to speak Mandarin and communicate with my grandmother.
If you think about what your grandmother needed to live more comfortably and well, you mentioned having someone who could communicate with her. Do you think the other elements of the Chinese culture were important to her? Was food important? Was understanding the customs and traditions? Did all of that come into play at all?
I think it had been for us, because we had told not necessarily for my grandmother, because at that time she was on a almost strictly like a pureed or liquid diet. So I don't think that was such a huge issue for her. My grandmother was also the least picky eater I've ever met. So she'll eat anything that's put in front of her. But I think it was mostly for us. We were saying that it's easier if we have someone, if this person's living with us a few days a week, If they're able to kind of share the same food as us, that, they don't have to make their own food, or we don't have to do something separate for them, that they can just, eat with us, like what we're eating. I think it was also for us that was going to be easier. Not necessarily for my grandmother.
When you think about her in the earlier part of the journey, was just maintaining some of those traditions that you have in your home and your family. Were they important to your grandmother?
I don't think we had any, I don't think we held on to any sort of traditional cultural traditions. I don't think we had any of that. Yeah, I don't think we had that, but I think we just wanted someone who would be able to come over and, we knew that it wasn't going to be the exact same as, us providing care for her. This isn't a family member to them. This is, like a job for them, right? We just wanted them to provide her with the best care that they can provide her with. That was just the main thing on our minds. We weren't really thinking about any of these traditions or anything. It was just someone who was going to be able to care for her. And, it was a bonus if they could speak the same language, and would look like us. And, if they would eat the same food as us, that would be easier on us. But other than that, I don't think there was any other, traditions or cultural traditions that, we were focused on.
Having said that, do you think, healthcare professionals need to be more culturally aware and sensitive and supportive of the needs of a diverse group like the Asian community, especially if they don't come from the Asian community?
Yeah, I think it was hard for a lot of doctors at that time to wrap their minds around the fact that we wanted to bring her home with us. They had all just assumed that she was going to go into long-term care or a hospice or something, that when that kind of time came, that it was just, she was going to be institutionalized. They were very, very shocked when we said that we want to take her home. We want her to be at home with us. And I think it's, they said they were shocked, but they told us that it was going to be a very hard time for us. But they were able to set up, the PSW help, the nursing. They were able to get that for us. But I think, based on our conversations with them and body language and just things like that, I think they were very, very shocked. And yeah, I don't think they think that she was going to make it if she was going to come home. And they probably thought that we were crazy for wanting to do that. But yeah, that was something that we were very adamant about, that we wanted her at home. And I think a lot of the doctors and nurses, they weren't understanding of that. And they didn't understand why we wanted to do that, because, that would come at the expense of our ability to kind of, go out and do our own thing as well. That was going to be a big toll on our life as well, to have an older adult with dementia living at home with us. But yeah, that was something that was never an option, to put her in a home.
One of the things that I found in speaking to a number of folks from the Asian community, they said the journey can be quite lonely, because typically it's the families that are the one caring and supporting. There's seems to be a tendency to not want to share too broadly with people about the diagnosis too. Was that something that you experienced in your family?
Not exactly about the diagnosis, because we never really got a formal diagnosis. So there was nothing to share. But other than that, yes, it was a very, very lonely journey. So I'm an only child. My dad is also an only child. My mom has a brother and a sister, but they do not live in the country with us. So it really was just the four of us for a long, long time. And I think my mom's siblings, I don't think they really truly understood what went into caregiving and the amount of time and effort, and also the emotional toll that it can have on a person. And so they were telling us, you need to go live your life, you need to go travel, you need to do what you want to do. But we were saying that we can't do that because we have someone here that needs our help. So I don't think that they truly understood what went into it. And the more we talked about it, I think it was just making us frustrated and them frustrated as well. And so it just came to a point where it's easier to not talk about it. And we just kind of keep it to ourselves. So yeah, that was tough because we didn't really have that outside support. Also from
You
family.
mentioned earlier you also didn't really share some of what you were going through with your grandmother. Why might be the case?
I think it was just because I had started caring when I was so young. I didn't know anyone else who was going through the same thing. And so I just didn't share that with them. And because I was not able to kind of join them for a lot of, outings and stuff, I think a lot of those friendships or relationships, they were kind of, not that they would, they didn't disappear completely. But I don't feel I was close enough to anyone for me to be able to share what I was going through. And also when I was in university, I also didn't meet anyone who was going through the same thing. And yeah, that was tough, not having someone to talk to about this kind of stuff. But it was also hard for me to talk about because I didn't know what to call myself because I didn't identify as a caregiver. The first time I actually kind of identified myself as a caregiver or even heard of that term was, I believe this was 2016, I think. And so it was for a University of Toronto undergraduate class where one of the professors has asked me, because I was kind of telling him about my experiences with my grandmother and talking about helping her out. And he said, I have a caregiving panel coming up where I'm inviting a few caregivers to come in. And would you want to do that and talk about some of your experiences? And I said, oh, there's a term for what this is. I didn't know that was a thing. And so it was hard for me to talk about because I didn't know how to talk about it and I didn't know who to talk to about it. But I think after that was the first time where I've met other caregivers. And I had people coming up to me afterwards saying, I'm going through something similar as well. And so I think it's hard for us to talk about these caregiving experiences because, caregivers, we don't walk around with, caregiver tattooed on our forehead, right? And announcing that we're caregivers. It's not really dinner party conversation. But when you find someone else who's kind of going through the same thing and can understand, I think it was just such a treat for me to be able to meet someone else or who's understood. And it's just easier because some of the things, especially as a dementia caregiver, there are a lot of things that are kind of embarrassing to talk about. You're helping like I was helping my grandmother with toileting, right? There's certain things that it's not dinner party conversation, right? And it's hard to describe to someone who hasn't gone through it. But it would have been great if I would have had some sort of, access to some sort of support group or something where I could talk to people who were going through something similar. And maybe even if it was someone in the same age group, if I could talk to other young carers, that would have been, I think, I mean, this is looking back. I mean, I think that would have been really helpful. But again, I didn't know where to look for something like that at that time because I didn't identify myself as a caregiver.
Great point. So on that line of thought, like if you think back, what are one or two things that could have been accessed or put into place to help you and your grandmother cope better?
I think a big thing would have been having more access or more hours available to us for PSW support or respite. Because all like me and my mom and my dad, we were so exhausted. And even though they say you have, even that last hospitalization that she had where they upped our hours to 21 a week, it's still only 21 a week. That works out to 3 hours per day. That's not a lot of time. And so sometimes because at near the end, my grandmother couldn't have been left alone. She needed round the clock care. She needed someone sitting next to her at all times to make sure that she wasn't going to fall or something, because she was still fairly, I mean, she wasn't independent, but she wanted to be independent. So she wanted to kind of walk around on her own, but she couldn't. She wanted to go to the bathroom on her own. She couldn't. So someone needed to be sitting next to her at all times. And so when we didn't have the private care there, or we didn't have the PSW support, it was one of us. It was either me or my mom or my dad. And so even finding time to go take like a quick shower, I would have to think twice about. So if we had more support from PSWs or respite, or any sort of help, that would have made such a big difference. And it would have been an opportunity for the caregivers, so me or my mom and my dad, to kind of recharge mentally as well as physically. And so a lot of the times the caregivers end up being the patients themselves. And so if that's the case, then who's going to take care of the original patient if their caregivers are all sick? And that ended up happening with us because my mom got sick and she passed away in 2022. So my grandmother actually, she passed away in 2023. So there was a year where it was just me and my dad in the private care. But when the private care wasn't here, it was just me and my dad. And so yeah, so the caregivers sometimes become the patients. And I think if we had more of that support, not that it would have prevented some of the things from happening, but I think it would have helped us a lot, especially emotionally, where we could, take that time for some self-care, or, just going out for a walk around the neighborhood. But we didn't have that. So I think that would have been one thing that would have been really, really helpful. And the second thing, which I think I briefly mentioned before, I think some sort of support group or something where I could talk to people who were going through something similar. I think that it would have been nice to have someone to talk to.
I'm sure it would have. How about for your grandmother? What do you think could have been put into place or that would be helpful for someone like your grandmother?
I don't know. I think that's my answer. I don't know what she would have wanted. But I also think, even though I'm saying that, I'm trying to see it from like both sides, because I'm saying that it would have been helpful if we had more supports, if we had more hours from PSWs and respite. But I don't know if she would have liked that, because that means she's spending the majority of her time with these strangers. And she would often tell us that she didn't need a babysitter. So it was weird describing to her, like why this person was there. I think she understood. She was always telling us, go out, go eat, or go out to eat, go do stuff, go travel. She's like, I'm fine on my own, but she's not fine on her own, right? She needs someone there. But I don't know if she would have been happy with spending most of her time with these strangers in the house, because just having someone there for a couple hours, she was already saying that she didn't need a babysitter. And that so maybe it would have helped us, but I don't know if it would have helped her. And the other thing is that a lot of these supports, when they send someone over, it would often be different people. It would rarely be the same person twice or three times. And I know that they had told us that it was because they didn't want these families to become too close to one of these PSWs. So just because there were concerns about because a lot of these PSWs, they work for certain agencies. And there's a lot of times when some of these PSWs could branch out on their own as a private care. So I think they were trying to discourage that, and they didn't want a lot of the families to create too close a bond with some of these PSWs. So they rarely sent us the same person twice. And so my grandmother was, she was the one that had to suffer because she would have a different person coming into the house every day, helping her with the shower. And that's uncomfortable. And it was also difficult for us because my grandmother had, she didn't speak English very well. She had a hearing problem. So we had to make sure that these people knew where everything was. Some of my grandmother's likes and dislikes, some of her quirks. It would have been so much easier if it was just the same person each time. But we couldn't do that. And we also had to be there when they arrived. So, if they come for an hour, it's not really an hour because you have to take out maybe 10 minutes from the beginning and the end. So yeah, so I don't know if that would have been helpful for her to have more of these supports in place. It would have allowed us to kind of maybe go out and do our own thing more, but it would have also taken away the time that we were able to spend with her.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for taking time and sharing some of your lived experiences. I think there was so much that I gained, and I know our audience will gain from hearing your story. So thank you for that. As you know, our goal with Calling All Voices is to shine a light on some of the real life needs and challenges that people living with dementia or their care partners have experienced, so that we can learn what else we can do to best support people from diverse communities, including the Asian community. To learn more about Calling All Voices, make sure to check out Dementia Action Alliance's website to read the white papers and view the podcast series. The white papers and podcast series are featuring the stories of individuals who are part of the Black, African, LGBTQ+, Hispanic, Latinx, and Asian communities. Thanks so much for your time.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Calling All Voices. If you're interested in learning more, please visit Dementia Action Alliance and/or the Global Council on Alzheimer's Disease websites for resources and information on Calling All Voices. The creation of this podcast was sponsored by Otsuka Pharmaceutical Development and Commercialization Incorporated. This podcast is not, however, intended to provide medical advice. The views, thoughts, and opinions represented herein solely belong to the individuals sharing their experiences and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Otsuka Pharmaceutical Development and Commercialization Incorporated or its affiliates. If you have specific questions, medical questions that is, by all means, contact your healthcare provider. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please make sure to subscribe to this series and share a review and let others know what you heard and or experienced on today. I'm Dr. Tan, and bye for now.